Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and today we're getting the first class here that I'm doing for you guys of the Player Core 2 remaster changes. We're finally here in the finished version of the remaster. All books moving forward will be compliant with the new remaster, and now all your favorite classes are more or less caught up to date, with some problems with stuff like Summoner, which will be probably covered in an errata. I doubt they're going to do a Secrets of Magic book remaster, so hold on to that. They're going to be doing erratas twice a year, so that's something to keep in mind. Also, I have to state that Paizo did give to me the Player Core 2 for the purpose of reviewing, but this is not a sponsored video. That I'm not being paid for this, obviously, so all thoughts and opinions here are my own. It's always at the top of my description for these kind of videos if you're ever curious. But let's go ahead and start talking about the Champion. Champion was the one I picked first because it felt like, to a lot of people, Champion was changing a lot. And while Champion did get some significant changes, more than a good majority of the classes here in Player Core 2, they mostly function the same, and you're going to see that here in this review. But, and as for these videos, I got to say as well, this is a what has changed video, only for what came out originally in the original player's book and advanced player's guide. So any Champion stuff that came out in other books is not going to be covered here. And if I don't specifically mention a feat or ability that has been changed, it is the same as it was when it was released in Legacy. So that being the case, we're all good. We're all square. This is just a video on the changes and what has changed. So speaking on deities, the deity hasn't changed, but you no longer need to share an alignment, as alignment is no longer a system being currently used. Now, obviously, you can choose to use legacy alignment rules, and that's completely fine. But as far as the remaster is concerned, there's no more alignment, so you don't need to share an alignment with your deity. But your deity does determine if your character is holy, unholy, can be holy or unholy, or can remain neutral. For instance, Torag allows you to choose holy, but you can remain a unaligned, essentially, champion. What that means is that you don't get the extra benefits of holy and unholy, and any spirit damage you do is just pure spirit damage. Now, Osmodeus, on the other hand, requires that you are unholy, so you can only pick a cause that requires unholy, or that can take unholy, which there are some neutral causes that allow you to, and your spirit damage now does extra stuff to holy creatures. So, not a super big deal, but just know that what god you pick does determine potentially what causes you can select, as the causes themselves require certain types of sanctification. And let's talk about sanctification. Sanctification mostly just puts you on either side of the spectrum of the holy-unholy spectrum. And in addition to this, you gain some new edicts. When you choose, or when you have holy, for instance, you gain the edicts: do not knowingly harm innocents or fail to prevent harm to an innocent if your direct intervention, blah, could have saved them. My bad, hard to read here. And you gain an anathema of commit murder. Now, this doesn't mean you have to act specifically in this way, but because they wanted to kind of open up the borders of Champion and make them less strict, you get some basic rules you have to follow, and you obviously have to follow the various edicts and anathema of your god as well. So with Sanctification, your god and deity and your cause will give you a list of rules, though they've been made a lot more flexible than they used to be. In addition, if you chose unholy, you gain the edicts: do not put another's needs before your own or those of your deity. And you gain the anathema of commit an entirely altruistic act, which some would philosophically argue is impossible, such as giving something away in charity, and put anyone's needs before your own or your deity. So if you fail to do any of these, you lose the magical champion abilities you have, like your aura and any focus spells you have, until you perform the Atone ritual. So to kind of boil that all down, all you need to remember is that if you choose a god that makes you holy, you can only choose a holy cause, and you have to follow the holy edicts and anathema. And if you choose the inverse, then you have to do the inverse. So if it's unholy, then you have to choose an unholy cause and uphold their edicts and anathema as well. Now, if you remain neutral, that remains completely fine. And if you have a god like Torag that allows you to choose holy, you don't have to choose holy, but you can still be holy and choose one of the neutral causes, and you just are holy in addition. So I did mention a lot about the causes. Let's go over the brief list here, but I'll get more into this as we go through the video. So the current causes that you can select is Desecration, which requires that you're unholy, Grandeur, which requires that you are holy, Iniquity, which requires that you're unholy, Justice, which is neutral, meaning you can be holy, unholy, or neutral, Liberation, same deal, Obedience, same deal, and Redemption, which requires you to be holy. So for Justice, Liberation, and Obedience, you can be holy, unholy, or neutral. But for Desecration, Grandeur, Iniquity, or Redemption, you do have to choose a side, and you do have to have a god that allows you to select those. Some gods have none. They don't allow you to select either holy or unholy, a truly neutral god, in which case you cannot play under that god as either Desecration, Grandeur, Iniquity, or Redemption. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. It's pretty open, and most of the time you have a choice. If you're playing a generally good character, you're going to pick the generally good causes, and you're going to be able to be holy. It's a very rare situation where a god prevents you from being unholy or holy. So yeah, granted, well, at all, I should say, a good god doesn't allow you to be unholy, rather typically. But for Justice, Liberation, and Obedience, you can play literally anything you want as far as a champion is concerned. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go into these causes in a little bit, but I want to cover a lot of the base core class stuff first before we get into that. And I just to mention, the Champions Code section was kind of just removed and instead replaced with the Anathema section, which more or less explains a lot of what I just covered here. You have to follow the various rules of the Sanctification, Deity, and Cause that you follow, but they are more like guidelines, and they're not super strict. Failing to do one of these things once is probably not going to get you kicked out of your god's good graces, but repeating to do so will. So it's mostly a role-playing thing. This is meant to be in the hands of you and your GM, so don't worry about it too much. As long as your character is not egregiously acting out of character for the design you put them for, you shouldn't have any problems. And of course, even if you do really mess up, there's always the Atone ritual. Another change to a core mechanic is Deific Weapons. Before allowing you to increase the damage of simple weapons and unarmed strikes, also gives you proficiency for advanced weapons. Now, there's some misconceptions here. For any ancestry that gives you weapon familiarity, like dwarvish or dwarven weapon familiarity, they do not turn martial weapons into simple weapons. So Deific Weapon does not bump up their damage. All that does is gives you their proficiency as if they were simple weapons, which is mostly only relevant if you're a class that doesn't get martial weapon proficiency. So, and you can argue with me, I've already talked with the devs about this, that's how it is. So, weapon familiarity feats do not allow you to change martial feats into martial weapons into simple weapons. It's only for the sake of proficiency. That's why they say, even here in Deific Weapon, that you treat advanced weapons as martial weapons for the sake of proficiency, which is all that it really does. It just makes you proficient. That's what it is. But on the bright side, yeah, Deific Weapon now allows you to have advanced weapons that you gain proficiency in as if they were martial weapons, which is pretty cool. And with some of the new god changes and some of the new gods coming out, with War of Immortals and Divine Mysteries, which is coming out later this year, we're going to probably see some more advanced weapons, which is really cool. And this allows our champions to have some really cool weapons. So something that I'm particularly very excited for. Another new change is the champion's aura. This is kind of a new feature, but all it does is just simplify old rules. So essentially, your champion has a constant aura of 15 feet, and all your champion auras and effects, like your champion reaction, affect creatures or characters in that aura. That's pretty much all it does. It's just a simplification of rules, but this also applies to some of the feats that we're actually going to go over, where anything that affects your aura essentially affects all of them. So for something like expanded aura that increases the range of your aura, that actually means that your reaction distance also increases, which is really cool. So Champion's Aura is a really good feature, and it just makes a core rule that you can look at for all following rules associated with auras and reactions. Now, talking about the devotion spells, since there's no longer tenets of good or tenets of evil, now you can pick a devotion spell based on the healing font of your god. So if you have a god that has only healing for its font, then you can choose Lay on Hands. And if you have a god that has only harm, then you can choose Touch of the Void. If it's heal or harm, you can choose both. And if it's neither, then we have Shield of Spirits, which is a new one. So Shield of Spirits is actually really cool. Now, Shield of Spirits does require that you're using a shield, but as an action, you raise your shield. So it has good action compression because it's combined with raise a shield, which is very solid. You or all your allies in your aura gain a +1 status bonus to AC, and each time an enemy makes an attack against an ally, it's an attack, not a strike, which is very important. That enemy takes a D4 spirit damage, which scales at every odd spell rank to do another D4. Now, this benefit only applies while your ally is within your aura, obviously, so if they leave, they no longer get the benefit, and if they enter after you've cast the spell, then they get the benefits. This is really good. You get an increase to your AC. This increases all your allies' AC, and you essentially apply Thorns of Spirit damage, which affects pretty much any living creature or undead creature, typically, which is very solid. So as long as it's not a construct, you get the extra Thorns damage. It increases, not a big amount, but the biggest thing about this one is, of course, you want to have the bonus, and this has the Sanctified trait, which means your allies gain the benefits of holy or unholy, or at least if a creature strikes them and has a weakness to them, then it will proc their weakness, which is also really good. And as I kind of mentioned already, Lay on Hands in Touch of the Void. Touch of the Void used to be Touch of Corruption. Now it does void damage rather than evil damage. Same kind of stuff with Lay on Hands. Or not evil damage, sorry. It was negative damage before. Lay on Hands now does vitality rather than positive, and they've cleaned them up to be easier to read, which is something I really appreciate. So the formatting looks good. The spells look good. So overall, a complete benefit, and because Shield of Spirits is really good, we're going to see some new feats related to this one as well, so stay tuned for that. Next up, let's talk about the Blessings of the Devoted. Now, this is a reworked version of Divine Allies and have been altered slightly. So, Blessed Armament used to be Divine Blade, but now it applies all the same runes, though it doesn't differentiate between the tenets of good and tenets of evil, since those are no longer a thing. So even a holy champion can have fearsome on their weapon, and a unholy one can now have ghost touch and vitalizing. So vitalizing is also the new form of disrupting, just so you know. But otherwise, it functions exactly the same as it did before. Blessed Shield, which used to be Shield Ally, actually got more of a general rework. Instead of just increasing your shield's HP and break threshold by half, you just now apply the reinforcing rune to your shield, whatever it is. Now, if your shield already has the reinforcing rune, then it just increases the shield's general hardness by 1. And this increases as you level. So whenever the shield would gain a higher level of the reinforcing rune, which would be lesser at 7th, moderate at 10th, Greater at 13th, Major at 16th, and Supreme at 19th, that's a whole lot, your shield will automatically upgrade as well. And if you're already using a sturdy shield, as I mentioned before, the hardness just increases by 1. This generally is a buff for most shields. Most shields, you would get like a steel shield, for instance, has an HP of 20 and a break threshold of 10. So increasing that by half would make it 30 and 15 respectively. But with the reinforcing rune, it gains an additional 44 hit points, which is obviously way more than 10, and a break threshold of 22 more for a maximum of 64 and 32, and a max hardness, because the hardness is increased by 3, which before it used to be increased by 2. So now for a max hardness of 8. And Steel Shield has 5, so it'd have a max. A Steel Shield gets essentially made into a sturdy shield. And if you are using a sturdy shield, then you are just going to increase the hardness by 1, making sturdy shields even better. And if your shield gets a hardness rune put onto it, or a hardness rune, a reinforcing rune put onto it, then its hardness will go up by an additional 1, which is also good. So the biggest point of this whole change is mostly to make using shields better. And if you have a specific shield rather than a sturdy shield, to give you a little bit more oomph, a little bit more HP, so it can absorb more damage. Overall, this is pretty much a buff to the shield ally and is incredibly solid. Now, the last blessing is Blessed Swiftness, and this one's going to be a little bit more controversial, but completely easily navigatable. So Blessed Swiftness replaced Divine Steed, or Steed Ally, which means now, as a base class feature, we do not get an ally, though Faithful Steed is a level 1 feat we can select, which will give similar kind of benefits, but we no longer get an animal companion as a base class feature. Some people are going to hate that, but what we got in exchange is a +5 status movement bonus to your speed, and if you're mounted, that bonus is conferred to your steed instead. So you now have a faster animal companion in general, if that's the way you want to go. And in addition, all allies within your aura get a +2 bonus to their defenses, which is their AC or saves, against any reactions triggered against movement. So this is a pretty good effect. Blessed Swiftness, I think, is very, very solid, and honestly has a very strong running compared to Blessed Shield and Armament, especially because that +2 defense can mean your team can move around some situations a little bit better, and that +5 status movement just makes a champion, which is notoriously a little bit slower than other classes, actually faster. And if you go the mount route, you'll have a faster mount. So overall, I say this is generally a buff. Some people are going to hate it because they're not going to be able to get a free feat essentially at level 1 if they want to go the steed route. But regardless, I think this works better. And this doesn't specify how your particular champion works. So you can just be faster. You don't have to have a mount, which conflating champions with mounts is a little silly in my opinion. So this is a really good alternative in my mind. So overall, really good buffs. Other than those major changes, the rest of the class remains pretty untouched with just some name changes. Lightning Reflexes got changed to Reflex Expertise. Juggernaut got changed to Sacred Body. And the champions now have new names for their actions. So no longer do we have Divine Smite. We have Relentless Reaction that enhances the cause, which we'll get to here in a moment. And instead of Exalt, we have Exalted Reaction, which they mostly do the same thing. Alertness has been replaced with Perception Expertise. And Hero's Defiance, which is the focus spell we would get at level 19, has been slightly changed. The healing has been changed from 68 plus 20 rather than 10d4 plus 20. I'm not sure about all the math around this. I do know that the high end is now higher. I just don't know if the middle range is now better or not. Regardless, it's not a big change, and it's for a level that most people aren't going to get access to anyway. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the causes so you can see some of the new changes. There is one essentially new cause, which is Grandeur, but we'll get to that in a moment. First, let's talk about Desecration. So Desecration used to be called Desecrator. Pretty simple. That's kind of the case for a lot of these. And they remain the same, obviously getting the new changes to alignment stuff based on the remaster. I'm not going to rehash all of that. Though their Relentless reaction, which used to be their Divine Smite, has been changed now. It requires a +3 to your charisma rather than +2. Now, this makes sense because it didn't do anything when you had +2 because that's exactly the same as the bonus you were getting before. So now it just makes more sense as base per the writing. So yeah, Desecration is mostly the same. But let's go ahead and I guess I should mention as well, if you didn't catch it before, it now requires that you're unholy. So you have to have a deity that can give you unholy in order to select it. Now let's talk about Grandeur. Grandeur is holy specific, so you need holy in order to select this particular cause. Its new edicts are provide a shining example for others, enjoy and share the beauty around you, and keep yourself tidy and well groomed. If you let yourself be muddy, that's not breaking your edict. It's if you let yourself remain grimy and grungy, that would be breaking your edict. Now, the anathema for this one is despoil yourself by associating with fiends and unholy forces, which could be problematic, probably one of the more problematic ones with all the changes, but honestly, not a super big deal, as you are a holy champion for this one specifically. Now let's take a look at its reaction. This one is essentially the same as what the Tenets of Good used to have, which is an enemy damages your ally and both are within your champion's aura. The ally gains the resistance as normal, 2+ your level, which is really good. And for 1 round, the attacker is affected by Revealing Light. Revealing Light, which used to be Glitter Dust in the Legacy version, is now you affect the target, the creature is dazzled, and if it was invisible, it becomes concealed instead. And if the creature was already concealed, it is no longer concealed. So you still get generally the reaction to save your ally from the damage. But now, in addition to this, you cast essentially a spell on them for free because there's no spell slot associated with this. So for 1 round, and it's for 1 round specifically, they're affected by Revealing Light. It's very strange. I'm not 100% sure. I guess because you're not casting it on them, or maybe they are just dazzled. A creature affected by Revealing Light, from reading the spell, is dazzled. So yeah, they're dazzled for a round, and as well, if they're invisible, they're concealed, and if they're concealed, they're no longer concealed, which it should be hidden by it, because this doesn't interact with hidden, weirdly enough. But yeah, so overall, a pretty powerful effect. Dazzling your enemy is very, very powerful. Now for your Relentless reaction, which would have been Divine Smite before. The enemy also takes persistent spirit damage equal to your charisma modifier, and it can't recover from this persistent damage while affected by Revealing Light from your Flash of Grandeur. So because it lasts for 1 round, it can't recover from it on its turn, but on its next turn, unless it triggers it again, which is really, really bad. Its Exalted, Exalted reaction, which used to be Exalt, is now, in addition to the enemy being affected by a Flash of Grandeur, each other enemy in your champion's aura is affected by Revealing Light spell for 1 round as well, which is insane. So Grandeur is very, very powerful because you daze enemies every time your reaction gets triggered, which is insanely bad because that makes everyone concealed, makes enemies more likely to miss. Now, is this stronger than some of the other reactions? Not necessarily. Being able to strike an enemy is just doing damage, which is getting you quicker to your win condition. This is only just slightly nerfing enemies. So, and obviously if you have enemies that rely on invisibility, that's a huge downside, but that's not very specific. So I will say overall, Grandeur is really, really good, very defensive, but not particularly broken. So I would say this one is pretty cool in my opinion. Next up, we have Iniquity. This one used to be anti-paladin, and while it works mostly the same, there are some changes to the edicts and anathema. So now its edicts are purely destroy that which offends you or stands in your way, and take advantage of others, cheat, and steal. Its anathema are bind yourself with a law other than what your deity requires. The biggest change from Anti-Paladin before is now there's no longer a good you can target, and it doesn't specify that you need to target holy specifically. So that being the case, it's just a little bit more flexible, but not anything too crazy. And now the extra damage you would get from your reaction actually upgrades from two extra spirit damage, which would be unholy spirit damage, to 4 at 9th level and 6 at 16th level, which is a pretty big boon, obviously. So overall, a general buff to what used to be Anti-Paladin now is Iniquity. But other than that, mostly unchanged. Then we have Justice, and Justice is was Paladin, is now just Justice, but it's mostly the same. Everything works exactly the same as it did before. Even very, very similar Edicts and Anathema. So similar, in fact, that I honestly couldn't find much of a difference. Liberation, guess what? Was changed from Liberator. It works mostly the same, has pretty much all the same Anathema and Edicts, though their Exalted reaction, which used to be their Exalt, has been tweaked slightly. So before, the Exalt had this weird stipulation where if your ally doesn't attempt to break free from an effect, you and all your allies can take a fifth within your aura, can take a step in addition to the triggering ally. That's no longer a prerequisite, and now it states specifically, you and your allies gain this benefit even if the ally who benefited from liberating step can't move. So no longer this weird stipulation that it had before. Overall, just cleaned it up, but otherwise works more or less the same. Obedience, which used to be Tyrant, mostly functions the same with some slight changes to its Edicts and Anathema. Now its Edicts are enforce proper hierarchies, topple illegitimate hierarchies, and lead when you're the most suited for the task. And Anathema is let one who is lesser than you wield power over you or lead you. Now, even though Obedience, and I didn't mention this with Liberation before, but this one's a little bit more poignant. Even though Obedience used to be Tyrant, which was an evil one, this is now just purely law, and the reaction is the same as it was before, but it doesn't have to be coded with the kind of evil or even tyrannical sense. It's just pure law, which is something to keep in mind when you're looking at some of these that don't require a specific sanctification. Now, what Tyrant used to have was mercilessly enforce established hierarchies of master and servant. You don't have to do that anymore. And topple or seize control of illegitimate hierarchies, which you do have, such as democratic governments, which is no longer a thing, or arrogant echelons of celestial planes. So they pretty much removed all the kind of more, they made this more neutral, more or less is what I'm saying. And you also no longer need to bind the weak to serve you specifically. So yeah, it's just been made more neutral, which honestly, I really appreciate. Having Obedience be just purely law allows you to work around the law and hierarchy dynamics more than just making it purely evil, especially because that it's not always evil. It's oftentimes very legitimate and for good cause. So yeah, even though this is mostly just Tyrants, it's been made way more neutral than it was before. And last, we have Redemption, which, wouldn't you know, used to be Redeemer. It works exactly the same in every way, except its Edicts and Anathema were slightly changed. Now its Edicts are to try to redeem those who commit wicked deeds, show compassion to others regardless of their authority or station, and its Anathema is to kill a sapient enemy without offering a chance of redemption. The biggest thing that changed mostly was now under the you must redeem those who commit evil acts rather than killing them or meting out punishment. And if they continue to do so, you have to deal with them. You don't have to deal with them. You just have to try to convert them, which is a lot more flexible. But other than that, it mostly stayed the same. So causes, honestly, I think people were expecting something a little bit more from the changes since some of them got new names. But more or less, they're mostly the same. Now just having a little bit more leniency when it comes to Edicts, Anathema, and now no longer requiring alignment, though some do requiring sanctification. So that being said, overall, it's not that different. If you played Champion before, this is going to feel almost exactly the same with just a little bit more freedom, which is only a good thing. Now we're moving on to the feats, kind of the biggest section here. So I apologize if this video is going to be a little bit long, but there's a lot of changes to some of these classes, a lot more than others. And of course, we've kind of chewed up some of the time already. So let's go ahead and just get right into it. Well, actually, before we get into it, if you like this content, please leave a like. Any like to any person's Pathfinder content is a big help. It gets Pathfinder content out there for more people to see, and overall makes Pathfinder just more visible to your average YouTube viewers. And if you like my content specifically, I recommend subscribing. Why? Because I'm going to be covering all the changes to the classes, spells, ancestries for the remaster, including archetypes as well. So if you don't want to miss any of those and you like my content specifically, then I recommend subscribing. Anyway, now let's go ahead and get to the feats. Starting off with Brilliant Flash. Brilliant Flash makes Grandeur even stronger. Grandeur now, when you use your Flash of Grandeur, also makes the affected attacker off guard for 1 round. Now, this is only for the attacker, and so if you have the exalted reaction, it doesn't apply to everyone else. It specifies here the attacker is off guard for 1 round, but the attacker being both dazzled and now made off guard is in a really bad spot, making Grandeur really, really good. Incredibly solid. A lot more supporty than, let's say, Justice, but definitely opens an enemy up for a lot more hurt from your team, which is really cool. Defensive Advance is another really cool feat. You might have seen it in my All the Biggest Changes video. If you haven't checked that one out, do so now so you can get a sneak peek at some of the bigger changes for some of the classes. Defensive Advance is really good, and it increases our general action economy and activeness as a champion. For 2 actions, you raise your shield and then stride, and if you end your movement within melee reach of at least 1 enemy, you can make a melee strike against that enemy. Now, you can use defensive advance with burrowing, climbing, flying, or swimming instead of striding if you have the corresponding movement. But the biggest thing about this one, honestly, is we now get to raise shield, stride, and strike at the beginning of combat and still have an additional action, which is really good. Since shields are very important to some champion builds, I do highly recommend taking this one, as it makes raising your shield much less of a general action tax in any of your given rounds. So overall, really solid. Another new feat is Faithful Steed. I kind of already mentioned this one, but this allows you to get your steed as early as level 1. And if you have the Holy or Unholy trait, your mount shares this with you as well. But otherwise, this works exactly like it would have for the steed ally. So now you just need a feat to get your steed. But now with the Swiftness Blessing, they now have a +5 movement speed while they're mounted, which is really cool. So if you want your steed, this is the way to go. And now they just get Holy and Unholy right off the bat, which is kind of cool. Nimble Reprisal is also a surprising buff to Justice cause here. It used to be called Range Reprisal, which is silly because this one is a lot more ranged than the old one was, and the old one was a lot more nimble, in my opinion. But anyway, so Nimble Reprisal, for the sake of name changing, allows you now to use a ranged weapon for your Retributive Strike, which is generally really cool. Now, the enemy does not need to be within melee range. They just need to be within your aura, but they still have to be within your aura, so it doesn't give you a lot. But hey, if you want to play a gun-toting Justice champion, like cowboy style, this is the feat to take, which is really cool. And in addition, this still does the same things that Range Reprisal used to do, which allowed you to step if an enemy wasn't within reach to get that reach, potentially with a melee weapon. So I will say Nimble Reprisal is actually really cool and opens up a whole new style of champion, which I think is super awesome. A little bit of verbiage change to Unimpeded Step. It allows now, or it applies now more specifically with the Exalted Reaction benefit, so it applies to everyone who steps. The old verbiage didn't necessarily exclude this, but it didn't state it either, as you can see here. So this is just some better verbiage to help clear things up, but otherwise it remains unchanged. Also, a feat was removed, Conceited Mindset. This was kind of a really silly feat before because we got our Divine Will, which more or less did most of what this did. We just no longer get the +2 bonus to saves against mental effects, but we would already get a critical success on a will-based save if we rolled a success anyway. So this feat eventually just became almost pointless, and a feat for just a +2 bonus is not the best, and it was very specific because it was for Tenets of Evil, so it's just been generally removed. Honestly, in my opinion, not too much lost here. Also, speaking about removed, all of the oaths were removed. So Dragonslayer Oath, Esoteric Oath, Fiend's Bane Oath, Lightslayer Oath, Shining Oath, and Vengeful Oath have all been removed. Now, they are planning on adding oaths to Divine Mysteries, which is coming out in November. So look forward to seeing the oaths then, but any oaths that were in the Advanced Player's Guide or core book or the original player's book are no longer there. Now we have to wait until Divine Mysteries to see these again. So sorry if you like the oaths. They wanted to clean up a lot of space for all the changes here in the book, and this was one of the bigger, kind of more bloated sections, mostly because they had 2 whole books to spread these between, and Champion couldn't take up that much page space. So it was kind of a space thing, and they're moving that space to Divine Mysteries. I'm assuming they'll play mostly the same as they used to before, but we won't know until that book comes out, which is in November. Now, Divine Health actually moved down to level 2, and it got some buffs. So not only now do you just get the +2 status bonus to saves against diseases and poisons, which, by the way, is +1 better than it used to be before, but now all allies in your champion's aura gets this benefit, but their bonus is +1 instead. This is in addition to the flat checks to recover from persistent poison damage, which is also really solid. Your allies don't get if they roll a success on a save against all diseases or poisons, they get a critical success instead. That's just for you. But now, if you have the Sacred Body class feature, which used to be Juggernaut, now if you ever get a crit failure on a save against a disease or poison, you get a failure instead, which is pretty cool. So Divine Health made earlier level, which is something I really appreciate, and the aura benefit is super good. So Divine Health became a lot better of a feat, in my opinion, and now we can select it as early as level 2, which is really good. Now, Aura of Courage and also Aura of Despair have been changed. Now, Aura of Courage only requires that you have the Holy Sanctification, and Aura of Despair requires that you have the Unholy Sanctification, but otherwise they work exactly the same. So now there's no longer the tenets, but you do need to be sanctified in order to select these. So something to keep in mind when you're making your champion. Mercy has been overall generally buffed, but also kind of debuffed in some other ways, which we'll get to in a little bit. But Mercy now applies to more effects. Before, Mercy used to only get rid of fear effects or paralyzation. Now, when you select Mercy, you select a particular type of Mercy. There's Mercy of the Body, Mercy of Grace, and Mercy of the Mind. And you can select this feat multiple times to gain the new mercies. Now, Mercy of the Body works on blinded, dazzled, deafened, enfeebled, and sickened. Grace does clumsy, grabbed, and paralyzed. And Mercy of the Mind does fleeing, frightened, and stupefied. That's way more benefits, and this actually compresses some of their later feats by giving some of the benefits to this general feature now. But if you do want to get all of these, you will have to select this feat multiple times. So while it is generally better and picking one of these mercies is already really, really solid, you just have to keep in mind that there is just this action compression. There's still going to be some feat taxes if you want to get the most out of your mercies. Honestly, the Blessed One archetype, which is in this book, just generally works better. So if you're using free archetype, which I don't know why you would, I'd probably go that rather than selecting all these mercy feats in champion. But hey, that's just me. We also got a new feat here at level 4 with security. Security is really good because now when you cast Shields of Spirits, you can use 2 actions rather than 1. When you do so, you give 1 ally in your aura a shield companion, which is not really mentioned here, but that's what it refers to everywhere else in the book. And for 1 minute, that ally gains the benefits of Shield of Spirit, even while the ally isn't in your aura, and even if your shield isn't raised. If you create another shield companion using the same feature, the previous one ends. So, more or less, and the wording on this one is so strange. Normally, your allies, the Shield of Spirits only lasts until the start of your next turn. With this benefit, your ally gets that +1 to AC while they are, for a minute, even if you don't use the spell over and over again, even if your shield isn't raised. And this does mean any enemies that is attacking this ally are going to get that damage, which is really cool. So security is actually an insanely good feat if you want to go with the Shield of Spirits route, which I think is very solid. So if you're playing a sword and board champion, we got some really good feats, which is super cool. Now, here is kind of a bit of bad news. Accelerating Touch, which gave your ally a +10 status movement speed when you used Lay on Hands on them, has been removed. Now, I don't know if we're going to see this in any of the future books, but any of the Lay on Hands extra benefit feats are not in this book, which means moving forward, at least in printing, they won't exist. They'll be in Legacy. Now, of course, they're Legacy, and Paizo has obviously said, go ahead and use Legacy content if you want. So if you want to have Accelerating Touch, that's between you and your GM. But as far as I know, it's been removed, and I honestly don't know why. So yeah, kind of sad news if you're a big Mercy / Lay on Hands style of champion. But again, as I said, you can just talk to your GM and use the Legacy content. That's completely fine. But as far as the remaster moving forward, it's not in any of the printed versions of the book. So that might be a thing for Society play. You'll have to talk to your Society organizers about that. I'm not overly familiar about that. So yeah, there's a lot of changes, and unfortunately, we're not going to get a lot of that news until the book fully releases, probably, which won't be until August 1st. But yeah, so as far as I know, Accelerating Touch has been removed. An interesting feat maneuver here, Expand Aura, which was a level 16 feat, has been brought down to level 6 and made generally better. What it was before is you selected one of your aura effects, and as an action, you could expand your aura to twice the range, 30 feet. But now, Expand Aura just applies, it just expands your class's divine aura. This aura extends to 30 feet, allowing you to use your reaction and aura effects within that range. Now, at 10th level, this extends for a minute, so pretty much for the combat. And at 16th level, it's just until you dismiss this expanded effect, which means it's really easy as early as level 6 to get an expanded champion aura. Granted, of course, until level 10, you have to do this every turn you want to have it expanded, which is a little rough. But if you select this feat at level 10, it's really, really good. So Expand Aura being dropped down to level 6 here is really cool and something I really appreciate. Now, Smite Evil and Smite Good have actually been removed. Instead, we now have Smite, which is a compressed version, which makes a lot of sense since now we don't have Tenets of Good and Tenets of Evil. So now what it does is until the start of your next turn, your strikes against that enemy increase to +3 status bonus, going to 4 if you're Master, and if you are Holy and the target is Unholy, increasing to 4 or 6 if you're Master, and vice versa. Now, this still gets extended if the target uses any hostile actions against you or one of your allies. But this is actually a big buff because what it was before was only if they targeted your allies. So this works for you, making it much easier to extend, which is super cool. And you no longer need to have the Blade ally. You don't even need to have the armament or Blessed Armament in order to do this one. So Smite just became more accessible. And while the damage was a little bit nerfed, it used to be just 4 outright and then 6 at Master proficiency. now with the added benefits and the fact that it gets extended if the enemy attacks you, I think that it's generally better. And a couple point damage difference isn't going to be a big deal anyway. So yeah, Smite, honestly, really good. Also, they added a really good stipulation here that I never even thought of before. So if you smite a different target, the last smite you use ends. So you actually can't maintain a bunch of smites on enemies over the battlefield. That's kind of sad, but to be fair, it was only whatever enemy you were striking anyway. So it wasn't something you were likely to keep going on, but I could see some of the benefits of that. So Smite overall getting a little bit of balance, but also being easier to maintain and generally doing the same things is really cool. And just being easier to extend is very solid. So really good and some very solid feat compression here. So we don't have just a billion champion feats that do kind of the same thing. Now, Corrupted Shield got removed. There's no longer Tenets of Evil. And while this could have been applied to some of the new causes, I think it would have been a lot more of a struggle. Still a little bit sad and really rough if you were a shield using evil champion, more or less. And as well, Invigorated Mercy got removed, but that's because it got compressed with the earlier Mercy feat, more or less giving the same thing. So all the future Mercies are pretty much that way with a few exceptions. Now, Litany against Wrath was also removed, but unlike the Oaths, the Litanies currently don't have a book planned for them. Now, there has been talks that they might come out in some future book, but as of right now, the Litanies have been removed. So if you enjoyed Litanies, they are kind of no longer a thing. Granted, as always, when it comes to remaster changes, just talk with your GM. You guys can agree to use legacy content, and Paizo's completely okay with that. So don't worry, it's still there if you want to, but that's just a question between you and your GM. As far as society play, talk to your organizers. Next up here at level 8, we have Greater Mercy. Now, this one did not get compressed and instead adds to whatever Mercy you picked before. So if you picked Mercy of the body, it now removes the drained and slow conditions and eventually stunned at level 16. If you chose Mercy of Grace, it's immobilized, restrained, and slowed, and at 12th level, it also removes petrified. And at 16th level, it also removes stunned as well, which is the same as body, which is kind of weird. And Mercy of the Mind removes confused, controlled, and slowed, and at 16th, it removes doomed and also stunned. So screw stunned. If you get Greater Mercy, you're just going to get stunned eventually at level 16. But yeah, so this just improves whatever Mercy you selected before. Not bad as a part of a feat chain. And if you selected the Mercy multiple times earlier, you don't have to select Greater Mercy multiple times. It only applies to whatever ones you currently have. So we don't need to spend 6 feats getting all of the Mercies, which is cool. But it's still a bit of a feat expenditure if you want to do it that way. It's still, 4 feats minimum, which is kind of crazy. Regardless, a pretty good choice. If you selected Security, which is already a really good feat, at level 8, we already get an improvement to it with Greater Security. This now, whatever ally has the Companion Shield, if you raise your shield, that ally gets the same benefits to their AC that your shield grants, which is kind of cool. And you can trigger shield block if that ally would meet the trigger. This shield uses your shield's statistics and applies damage to your shield. So you can shield block your ally pretty much no matter where they are because they don't need to benefit from your aura in order to get the effects of the companion. So this is actually really, really good. Greater Security allows you to essentially, you designate an ally when you use your Spirit or Shield of Spirits, and you give them a bonus to AC. Whenever you raise your shield, they get a bonus, and you can block them at any time. Greater Security is absolutely necessary for protecting some of your squishier party members. If you have someone who's going particularly squishy frontlining, or even one of your casters, you want to be the ultimate defender, go the security route. It's just insanely good. Second Ally has been replaced with Second Blessing, but it more or less does the same thing. Now you choose another blessing rather than another ally. Must be different from the one you chose before, but yeah, it's the same thing, just a name change. Now, another interesting change is Sacrifice Armor. Sacrifice Armor has been completely removed. I'm not going to go over the spiel again. If you want to use legacy content, that's between you and your GM. But I'm not particularly sure why. I guess it was just a situation where people didn't want to break their armor because that's very crippling to do. But I don't see a big reason other than I'm sure they just wanted to keep the champion section in the book as tight as they can, because obviously they're trying to compress 2 books worth of feats into a singular book with the player core. So some feats probably had to get the axe, and sacrifice armor was one of them. Now, 2 more feats that also got removed was sense evil and sense good. Now, this one makes sense because good and evil are no longer a thing. Sure, they could have done sense unholy or sense holy, but honestly, not a very particularly enticing feat, if you ask me particularly. So I am not too upset by them missing, and it makes a lot of sense. Though I do admit that there are some replacements, and if you do want to use the legacy versions with your GM, then you just change it to holy and unholy, and that honestly does more or less the same thing. So either way, not a really big deal. Now, Radiant Blade Spirit has been changed to Radiant Armament and has more or less been completely reworked. No longer does it offer flaming, but instead it offers the astral and brilliant property runes. In addition to this, you can choose the holy rune or the unholy rune if you have the proper sanctifications. Now, in addition to this, you can actually change what rune your weapon has selected with a 10-minute activity that has a concentrate, divine, and exploration traits. More or less the same thing as refocusing. Changing the rune doesn't restore abilities that can be used only a limited number of times, such as holy healing for the holy rune, but it does just allow you to, for instance, swap off of the holy rune if you no longer are going to get the benefits of holy healing for that daily use. So that being the case, Radiant Armament is just generally an improvement from Radiant Blade Spirit and offers you some better runes, in my opinion. Now, Shield of Reckoning mostly works the same, but it got a special benefit here in the special tag. Now, if you have an ability or a feat that gives you additional reactions with either shield block or your champion reaction, Shield of Reckoning applies to these as well. So Shield of Reckoning used to be a unique reaction that you had to use, and then your extra reactions couldn't reapply it. Now, it can if you have the quick shield block, which allows you to use your shield block an additional time, or if you have divine reflexes. So overall, a big buff to Shield of Reckoning, which was already a really good feat because it amplified how much you could protect your allies. So I'm very happy with this change in particular. We also got a new focus spell here at level 10 called Spectral Advance. This one's really cool and adds to the actioniness of new champion. So for 1 action or 2 actions, you can stride to a space adjacent to an enemy. And if you use the 2 action version, you can stride twice. Now, if you have a fly, whatever, extra movement speed or different movement speed, you can use those instead. Movement from Spectral Advance does not trigger reactions, and you ignore difficult terrain and greater difficult terrain. And also, during this movement, you or your mount, because this actually also applies to your mount if you're currently mounted, have resistance equal to your level to any damage you might take, which might be from environmental damage. So more or less what Spectral Advance is an engagement tool that allows you to get to an enemy of your choice. Now, the weird thing about this particular focus spell is it doesn't state what happens if you can't get adjacent to an enemy, but I guess they're assuming with 2 actions, you always can. It just says you stride to a space adjacent to an enemy. That's it. There's no special text here around that, which probably will have to be eroded or whatever. I'm not 100% sure. It's a really good focus spell. I really like this one. It makes champion better. And because these are just replacing stride actions, they're just an enhanced stride that you can spend a focus point on if you really want to. Some people might see the benefit in this. Other people might not. So overall, a really cool feat. Now, at level 12, we have Devoted Focus. Now, Devoted Focus used to be a level 10, but now it restores all focus points rather than 2 on a 10-minute rest. So overall, a improvement and a little bit of efficiency built into it. I totally agree with this particular choice. I think it works really, really well. And champions are absolutely going to want us like this one because we have so many good focus spells nowadays that having to sit down for 30 minutes to get all your focus points back is a little rough. So devoted focus, really, really good now. Now, elucidating mercy was removed, obviously for the compression, so it's no longer here. It's been meshed into either greater mercy or mercy. Not a bad choice overall. Now, litany against sloth and litany against self-interest also removed. As I mentioned before, litanies currently do not have any plans to be returned, though they are talking about potentially bringing litanies back. You know, talk to your GM if you want to use legacy content. I'm not going to give the whole spiel again. Resilient Touch also removed. All the extra mercy feats were removed, as I mentioned before. We may see them in a later book. I think most of them got removed to trim some of the fat from Champion since it had so many different feats. So we may see it in a later book. And of course, if you want to use legacy content, talk to your GM. Aura of Faith has been changed. Now it's no longer tied to good and evil, but now holy or unholy, and you don't get the additional damage. Though the benefit is this doesn't specify what alignment your ally has to benefit from this. And because Aura of Faith before was specifically good against evil, now it just works for holy and unholy. So yeah, more flexible, more easy. Granted, you no longer apply the extra damage, but most creatures who have holy or unholy have a weakness to the opposite anyway. So you're likely to do extra damage regardless. So overall, not bad, and it allows for now an unholy version, which just makes a lot of sense. Next up, we have Blessed Counterstrike, also here at level 12. Now, this is an action that has the Flourish trait, which it didn't have before, but now it's a singular action rather than two actions. This used to be Blade of Justice, but it has been reworked to get some new benefits, like one being one action, for instance, and Flourish. And now it doesn't specify a target who was an innocent. Now it's just an enemy triggered your champion's reaction since the end of your turn. So anyone you use your reaction against applies for Blessed Counterstrike, but more or less it does the same thing, only now it deals one extra damage die. And if the strike hits, the target gains weakness equal to half your level, which is 6 at this level, to all strikes made by you and your allies, which is absolutely insane. Everyone doing extra weakness damage to this enemy, when before what would happen was the strike would deal 2 extra weapon damage dice if the strike was against something who was evil, which is no longer the requirement. And if you were evil, and if the target was evil, so it's just better now, even though it doesn't do 2 weapon damage dice. And I guess it doesn't convert all your damage to spirit damage, which would have been really cool. Now, instead, it does 1 weapon damage die, but it's easier to use because it's only a singular action, and all your allies get the benefit of it having a weakness. So overall, I would say Blessed Counterstrike is generally an improvement on Blade of Justice. For level 12 feats here, Amplifying Touch was removed. As I mentioned before, any of the touch-based feats were removed, probably to save space in the book. Speak to your GM if you want to use legacy content. Enforced Oath was removed, but we'll hopefully be seeing this again in Divine Mysteries. And actually a lot of specific feats for certain champion dedication or causes, which I think is very strange. No longer do we have Lasting Doubt, Liberating Step, or Pale Horse. Pale Horse obviously wasn't specific to a specific cause, but still some very interesting removals. Again, I'm pretty sure they're just trimming the fat for champion here, focusing more on general stuff, because all of the causes mostly got stuff at level 1. So it makes some sense. Maybe we'll see some of this in another book. I'm sure, again, they just kind of ran out of space as champion. This was all split between multiple books. So, as I said, if you want to use legacy content, speak with your GM. Aura of Determination used to be Aura of Preservation, and now the feat is just less orientated around aberration specifically, but it does more or less the same thing. You and all allies within your aura get a +1 status bonus to saving throws against mental, morph, and polymorph effects in general. No longer is it targeted against aberration specifically, which does mean it doesn't increase if the effect is coming from an aberration. So, that being the case, I would say it's just simpler now and not so niche and specific, but at the same time, it's not as good. It's more general now. So it's more general, but if it's against aberrations, you no longer just get a bonus against all stuff from aberrations. So, you know, I could see either way going with the last one was obviously a lot more niche, and this one is obviously a lot generally better. But if you were in a campaign like Abomination Vaults, for instance, aberrations were rather common, and that was a really good feat. So, legacy content, yada yada. I would say generally this is a buff, though. Aura of Righteousness also got some changes and has been tweaked. So no longer is there tenets of good and tenets of evil now. It's now specifically for holy sanctified champions, so it's something to keep in mind. And the resistance is less, but also more. So you and all your allies within your aura gain a 5 resistance to unholy spells, unholy strikes, and other unholy effects. If a teleportation spell or effect would teleport an unholy creature out of your aura, you can attempt to counteract this one. Now, this used to be the effect of Anchoring Aura, which has been removed. So, overall, a little bit of compression and brought up to the remaster, making Aura of Righteousness really cool. And as I mentioned before, this does mean that Anchoring Aura has been removed. So, not a big deal. Like I said, already kind of compressed. And honestly, it's better now because Anchoring Aura was specifically against fiends, which this one is just a lot more open for you. So a very solid buff to Aura of Righteousness. Aura of Vengeance was removed, but this one was tied specifically to an oath. So we might see this vengeful oath, obviously. So we probably will see this one in Divine Mysteries. Greater Interpose also removed because there's no longer Sacrifice Armor. So, that being the case, obviously the later feat wouldn't be here. Probably cut for space reasons. Talk to your GM about using legacy content, yada yada. Litany of Depravity and Litany of Righteousness also removed because all litanies have been removed. We may see them in a future book. Who knows? All I know is there's no current plans to bring them back. Legacy content, GM, yada yada. Wormbane Aura also removed because it was also tied to an oath, but we'll probably see the oaths. This one specifically in Divine Mysteries, so stay tuned for November. Moving on to level 16, Auspicious Mount is really good. So Auspicious Mount essentially got the combined effects of Celestial Mount and Fiendish Mount, which were removed. And now your Celestial Mount makes your faithful steed a specialized companion, allowing you to take one of the other specializations or the new Auspice specialization, which honestly, the Auspice specialization is really, really good. I don't know why you would select any of the other specializations, but, I guess that's up to you. So now with the Auspice specialization, your animal companion gains the Celestial Fiend Monitor or Monitor trait, whichever best matches your deity's servitors, and its appearance shifts to look more like those servitors. It also gains the Holy trait if it was Celestial, or Unholy trait if it's a Fiend. This is kind of weird, and I think it's because they were taking some of the old text. Your mount was already holy or unholy based on selecting faithful steed in the first place. But I guess if you were neutral, then it gets those traits. So no, I guess it does make sense. So yeah, if you were a neutral champion, now your mount has either holy or unholy if your god is celestial or fiendish, which is interesting. Its intelligence modifier increases by 2, and its wisdom modifier increases by 1. Its proficiency rank in religion increases to expert. It can speak the language associated with your deity's servitors. Its maximum hit points increase by 20, increasing to 25 at 18 and 30 at 20. And if the mount has the celestial trait, its extra HP increases by 5, and it gains a weakness 5 to unholy and vice versa for fiend. So extra HP, but gaining a weakness to holy. They also gain wings. And, I should say, it gains wings and a fly speed equal to its land speed. So really, really cool. This is a feat compression of a couple of feats. It makes your mount really, really cool, and it does it at level 16, which is very awesome. So overall, a huge improvement to Auspicious Mount. Next, I'm going to mention Instrument of Zeal. It's mostly the same, but I just kind of want to mention it because its prerequisites have kind of vastly changed. So now you need Blessed Counterstrike or Retributive Strike reaction. Before, you just needed Tenets of Good and the Divine Blade ally, so this opens it up a lot more for other styles of champion play. Also has a feat requirement, or you need to play the Justice champion, and this applies to any of the causes that grants an ally resistance to enemies' damage. So now there's no longer Tenets of Good or Tenets of Evil. Now it's kind of this weird, vague description. You'll see this in some of the other feats when you get the book, access to the book. Most of the feats didn't actually change, but they now just have this kind of weird thing. So Grandeur, Justice, Liberation, and Redemption. If you're curious about Instrument of Slaughter, it specifies Desecration, Iniquity, and Obedience. But otherwise, Instrument of Zeal works exactly the same way as it did before. I just kind of want to mention the prerequisites because they actually have changed quite considerably. At level 18, we got a new feat called Swift Retribution. When an enemy triggers your champion reaction, you are quickened on your next turn. You can use this extra action to move closer to that enemy or to strike that enemy. Swift Retribution is really, really good because this essentially gives you an extra strike on an enemy if you're not already adjacent to them, or a free movement. So overall, Swift Retribution is really, really good. Also here at level 18, Ultimate Mercy actually got a buff. Before, you would use your Lay on Hands on a character who died within your last turn. They would come back with 1 hit point and wounded 1. But now, in addition to this, the creature gains the other benefits of Lay on Hands after it returns to life. So they get the healing and whatever else you might apply to them, which is pretty cool. So overall, a huge buff to Ultimate Mercy because now they're no longer just ready to be struck down immediately, or you don't need to spend extra focus points to heal them. They come back to life and then are healed, which is really cool. And as I mentioned before, at level 18, there's no longer Celestial Mount and Fiendish Mount because they got compressed into Auspicious Mount. Just figured I'd mention that again if anyone wasn't keeping track. Now at level 20, we did get some changes. So Armament Paragon used to be Radiant Blade Master, which was quite a mouthful before, and now it's generally just been reworked. So now for your Blessed Armament, you can select Animated, Greater Fearsome, Grievous, Keen, and Greater Vitalizing. And if you had selected Radiant Armament before, you get Greater Astral and Greater Brilliant added to the list. In addition, you can change the rune you've selected for your armament as a singular action. Changing this rune doesn't restore any of the abilities as mentioned in Radiant Armament, but yeah, super cool. So Armament Paragon is very, very solid, giving you more rune choices than we had before, and the ability to swap your runes as a single action, which is insanely cool. Sacred Defender also actually got a pretty good buff. So now you just flatly gain resistance 5 to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And if you're holy, that resistance increases to 10 against unholy creatures, and vice versa. And similarly, as Sacred Defender we used to work before, in addition, any creature roll a nat 20 on an attack roll don't automatically increase their degree of success by 1, needing to get at least 10 over your AC, which at level 20 is insanely hard because you're a juggernaut of armor. So Sacred Defender overall is better. It used to only apply its effects to creatures opposed to your tenants, so evil for good, good for evil. Now you just get a flat resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, getting the increased resistance when you're going up against those specific creatures. Oh, I did miss a couple feats here on my list. Dyslexia got me there. Celestial Form and Fiendish Form have also been removed. Again, this is, I think, a space reason, so I couldn't really think of any other reasons beyond that. So, like anything else, speak to your GM if you want to use some of the legacy content. But yeah, that's going to be it for the champion. A lot of stuff, a very long video. I'm sitting here recording this video for nearly 2 hours. Hopefully that's it. Hopefully there's nothing else. I don't think I missed anything. I'm doing better this time to make sure I get all the changes, all the rules. Hey everyone, this is me at 2:30 a.m. editing this video for y'all to watch later this day. And I forgot one of the feats, even though I just said in the video that I hope I didn't miss any of them. So let's go ahead and talk about this feat so I can finish this video. All right, so there was one more new feat added because we have a new blessing. This is Swift Paragon. This requires you have Blessed Swiftness, and what it lets you do is if your ally starts a move action within your champion's aura, their movement during that action doesn't trigger any reactions, which kind of makes the defense you get from Blessed Swiftness a bit redundant, but oh well. This is level 20, so I guess who cares? And in addition, you are permanently quickened. You can use this extra action only to step or stride or fly if you have flight. And if you have an animal companion that you're mounted upon, you can have your mount be quickened that turn instead of you, which is one of the very, very few ways your animal companion can really get quickened. It's so weird with animal companions and stuff. So whatever, your animal companion gets an extra action that can be used to move as long as you're mounted upon them. So yeah, Swift Paragon, pretty cool. It adds to the level of it. For a level 20 feat, I'm not sure how good this is, and it kind of makes some of Blessed Swiftness stuff a little redundant. But being permanently quickened to either step or stride is just never a bad thing, so who knows? This might be for you, and if you have a mount, I mean, your mount is probably really fast, and that's probably really cool too. So yeah, that's the last feat. All right, we're done. Continue on with the rest of the video I had done for you guys. I will add timestamps to this video because it's particularly long. I might not do that for every video, and I'm really, really busy this time of year as I'm trying to get these videos out, and I'm trying to get ahead of schedule because I have a vacation with my friends in early August. But yeah, hopefully you liked this video. If you did, subscribe so that I can validate the reason I spent all this time working on this video and all the future videos. Or at the very least, leave me a like, give me a cookie, please. I'm begging you. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Look forward to more remaster videos coming in the near future. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.